How will the U.S. Supreme Court rule on same-sex marriage? That is what we are talking about on OpenLine. How do you think the U.S. Supreme Court should rule on same-sex marriage? Ruling is expected in June. There were arguments on both sides. Justice Kennedy is often considered kind of the swing vote. Yeah. Many of these things go down 5-4. He said during the questioning, it's very difficult for the court to say we know better after barely a decade of experience with same-sex marriage in the United States. That led some to think that he may vote against allowing same-sex marriage in all 50 states. Now, he asked some other questions that made him think the other way. But what do you think about that comment? It's very difficult for the court to say we know better after barely a decade of experience with same-sex marriage in the United States.
I think it probably surprised a lot of people, and maybe you'd agree, David, that history was so much a part of the argument that that section of the argument seemed to take up a lot of time to me and maybe to you as well. And they kept using the phrase millennia of practice in marriage that seems to exclude same-sex marriage. I would not come before you today and argue that you're going to find huge periods of history involving thousands and millions of people in which there was same-sex marriage recognized by a government. I think there are some instances. I think the fact that it's prohibited in some ancient legal codes, the Theodosian Code in the Roman Empire, for example, they were specifically banning it because there had been instances of same-sex marriage. I think if you look at some Native American societies, you will find what we now call two-spirit people, but they didn't use that term at the time, but people who are gender fluid who were involved in relationships with, heterosexual men.
So you're saying there is history, and it's not just 10 years of experience.
But I would also say that history is illustrative. It gives us an example to look at, but it is not determinative. We have a bit more of a philosophical republic in the United States as opposed to one that simply exists based on tradition. Our Constitution was constructed on principle, I think. There's experience involved, certainly, but it's based on principle. And if you look at the amendments to our Constitution, they are based on rights and principle and not merely on what tradition has been. If we went simply on tradition, many of our traditions would be mired in all kinds of oppressive forms today. We don't have slavery anymore. Women are no longer considered property in marriage. They're given away. They have rights. For good or for ill, we have no-fault divorce now. There have been many changes in marriage over the years. Age of consent, degree of relation. Some states have common law marriage, some don't. So there are a variety of practices with respect to marriage that have changed.
What do you think about his comment there, Justice Kennedy, his question? It's very difficult for the court to say we know better after barely a decade of experience with same-sex marriage in the United States.
Well, I mean, I hate to say, in a sense, his statement speaks for itself. I mean, if you're, and Justice Breyer later said, okay, after all this period of time, you want 9 of us to say everybody else has always had it wrong. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think in that sense he was struggling with it because that's a pretty arrogant kind of thing, is to say everybody for thousands of years in all kinds of cultures that embraced all kinds of sexual practices, they've all been wrong. And now since 2001, when the Netherlands first had gay marriage and we had it in 2004, all of a sudden we've reached some enlightened period of time. And you know what has to be appreciated in my mind, this whole question of marriage being a fundamental right, that the question is, well, why was it ever fundamental? Why was it fundamental? And is a relationship between 2 men or 2 women of the same kind of relationship that shares in what was fundamental? What was fundamental in all those societies is that when men and women get together, they have the potential to create a child. And other relationships don't. So in that sense, those relationships, and I would not deny that they can't be important to the people in them, whether we should respect them or not, or all these kinds of things, but they're not of the same type or same nature. And that's where the court was saying, you're wanting us to fundamentally change it. And when one of the advocates for same-sex marriage said, well, what about 3 or 4 people? She said, well, that's fundamentally different because it's always been 2. And he said, well, you can't say that, because fundamentally it's always been about a man and a woman. Where did you get the idea it has to be limited to 2? So I think, as Chris said, there's some profound philosophical questions here. When we unhinge marriage from a man and a woman, then the court owes it to us to tell us what it is. Not just say, well, it's not that. They need to tell us what it is. And the reason I say that is I've been a state legislator, and I don't want to have to come down here and pass laws guessing at what marriage is. I want to, by golly, tell me. If you're going to overrule thousands of years worth of understanding. You owe it to us to tell us what it is so I can pass the laws, and you can't just say, well, it's not that.
And there's some who say, well, there's no harm if two people love each other, let them do whatever. And that is an opinion that in the polls, seems to be gaining a lot of traction. What is at stake in your view? You're opposed to this. What is at stake?
Well, this is where we come back to the constitutional question. If we're simply going to have a policy debate, we could sit here and say, well, we think two people of the same sex should be allowed to get married. And then we could have a debate 5 years from now, 10 years from now, well, what about 3? Or what about 4? And can only one marry the other 2, or can all 3 marry each other? We can have all those discussions. When all of a sudden you say this is a constitutional right, then the next guy comes in and says, well, now wait a minute. Why don't I have a constitutional right to my idea of what marriage is? And why are you denying me the dignity of approving my relationship? And to be honest, I don't have an answer to that.
But we've had that debate in this country before. We've had that debate in this country before about Utah's admission to the Union.
Yeah, we
could have the debate again. We can always reopen debates in America. I mean, it's not that a Supreme Court decision closes a debate for a period of time, but not always. I mean, we certainly, on the issue of sodomy, whether it can be banned, whether it can be enforced, bans on sodomy can be enforced in the states. We've had Supreme Court decisions within just a few years of each other, really, in the long stretch of history. I would say we should look at what the goods of marriage are, and not merely this question of love. Love is extremely important. I think choice is also important, but the goods of marriage, as the church has defined them for almost 2 millennia, really are not only procreation, but the mutual support of the partners. That has always been a good. Even when the church assumed it would be a man and a woman, the 2 goods that Augustine and throughout canon law, Aquinas and many other Christian theologians would talk about would be the 2 pieces. You may have children, but even if you don't, it's for the mutual support of the spouses.
All right, we have a bunch of calls. We're going to go to the calls here. Let's go to Dennis. Hello, Dennis.
Yes.
Go right ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm enjoying the discussion very much. Appreciate you having it on. My point was back for just a moment or 2 ago when you were talking about traditions and length of time that certain things have been discussed. And this isn't me. I just happened to hear this today. And David, I thank you for your comments today at a meeting in Murfreesboro. But there's a quote ascribed to G.K. Chesterton, the English theologian, and I heard this today, late this afternoon, and it said that John Kennedy quoted Chesterton in 1945, and the quote was, and I've got it right here, I looked it up, don't ever take a fence down until you know the reason why it was put up. I tend to think that's where we are right now. You go back 2,000 years, and we go back and we talk about the church and the Bible and what marriage was about. Why was it established 2,000 years ago? And before we tear that down, we need to be very careful and understand why it was put up to start with. Thank you.
Okay.
I agree completely. I would take a different implication from what he said, but there has been a fence for many years, and many of those years, different national human populations were at risk of not reproducing enough to maintain themselves. And when you're being attacked by enemies, when you're hit by huge plagues of starvation, on and on and on, massive disease, facing massive disease, you might run the risk of not sustaining your population. We don't have that issue now. We do not have that issue now. And what is continuous in the tradition is that 2 men and 2 women have the capability of being mutually supportive. People will talk about Adam and Eve, but what God says in Genesis is, I wanted to make a helper meet for you. And 2 people can do that for each other. 2 people can be mutually supportive, whatever their sex.
And what do you think of that, David?
Well, I mean, Chris is the guy that got his degree in theology, but the person that was the helper, if we're going to talk about it, was somebody suitable for you. And where we would differ is that I don't see fundamentally as sexes, men and women, as interchangeable parts. While there's a continuum of what masculinity might be and femininity might be, men and women are different. And so if we want to talk about the theology of it, God made them, he said, male and female, He didn't, and he could have made 2 males. Could have made 2 females.
Well, he did make Steve. The question is, what Steve is for.
He made Steve through.
When people ask me, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Well, God made everybody, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, he did, but he made Steve through Adam and Eve coming together, because there was a complementariness there, and so I think there's something much more than just simply. We're going to support each other and encourage one another in our mutual endeavors, and we're going to share the bills and all those things, and like, as I said, there are lots of relationships, and we need to be careful in how we value them or denigrate them. But there is something that is unique and different about a man and a woman that come together. That is a wholeness. That's the one thing God said was not good, that man be alone, that he be singular, or that there be just another man.
And as he said, for a time, for a society to survive, perhaps there was this man, it needed to be that you procreated. We don't have that issue anymore.
The other issue,
we're not reproducing at a rate, by and large, in this country biologically to sustain ourselves. It's because of immigration and those things. You got European countries that are not reproducing at the 2.0 or whatever it is rate that is necessary.
We're not lacking for people, though, I think, is the issue on the planet. The planet's population is growing quite fast. I think the other thing I'd say is we're at a point in our history where we can reflect and say, do we really want marriages where one partner has no possibility of being attracted and in love with the other one? And if you believe that sexual orientation differs and is a real thing within a person, there's no way that any parents should want their daughter to get married to me, whatever my personality flaws might be. There's no reason in the world for people who are not in any way attracted to someone of the different sex to be married to that person and united to them for life. It makes absolutely no sense. And I don't think the default call is to celibacy. I think celibacy is a very specific call. So the question is, can 2 men, 2 women form the same kind of bond as marriage? And this is where we differ, I think.
Sure.
And can society benefit from that, whether it's adopting children or whatever? And you think society would not benefit?
Well, I mean, no. I think we need to affirm the design of a man and a woman in a marital relationship and support that. But again, this is where I go back to the top of the show. The discussion we've just had is a great discussion. I think it's a policy discussion. I don't think it's a constitutional discussion.
I agree.
And that may be also, a difference where I'd say, let's go back, let's have it in the states, and that may be what Justice Kennedy would do, is to say, I'm not going to sit here and tell everybody they've all been crazy, and these millions of people in America that all voted for this, because I think it'll wind up that way anyway. Going back to your first question, is inevitable, and the policy debate will change. And as Chris even noted, 20 years from now, we can have that policy debate again and say, this isn't working very well.
Yep.
If it's a constitutional issue, it is harder to change the Constitution. Somebody's got to bring a lawsuit. It's got to go all the way through. But the legislature's famous for going down here and passing a bill and next year fixing it because they didn't get it right.
All right, so we have to take a break. A lot of calls. Promise, we'll get to your calls. Hold on the line. Take a break. Be back right after this.